Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned. And we've returned today with another Bookshelf Essential video. Bookshelf Essentials. This is a series of videos created by the great David Wiley over on his fantastic channel. I'll link his channel down below. This is a series of videos where we talk about books that are essential to our libraries, books that we would never ever get rid of under any circumstances. They must lurk in our libraries forever. Kind of like Roger. And I have one of those books today. It's this book. It's the Essential Ellison, a 35-year retrospective. So we're talking about Harlan Ellison today, who I've been thinking a lot about recently. He has recently come out with a book, or a book has been published of Harlan Ellison's fiction called Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits. I believe that's the title, Greatest Hits. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy because of the dreadful 500 book challenge I'm doing. Thanks, Roger. That was a great idea of yours. I'm just going to blame Roger for that. So I don't have a copy of that book, but I've heard a lot about it. I've seen some videos on BookTube about it. And so I know the contents of the volume, all award winners. Harlan Ellison won a lot of awards, and he deserved them. So all award-winning stories in that volume, and it sounds like an excellent book. But this one is better. This is a better book, it sounds like. The 35-year retrospective. Now it has room to be because this book is very, very large. It's over 1,000 pages long. So yeah, you've got that. There was also a newer edition of this published in 2001. This was published, I want to say, in 1987. But let me not be crazy and look. I probably should have looked before I started the video. That's what a smart person would have done. Okay, this is copyright 1987. There you go. And it has all these cool pictures of Harlan Ellison in it. There's that angry young man, Harlan Ellison. So this is, a 35-year retrospective, but in 2001, a 50-year retrospective was published. That volume seems to be harder to find. This one I've seen around a lot in used bookstores. You can go to eBay and find it. It runs usually anywhere. It tends to run around $50, $50 to $60, depending on who's selling it to you and what kind of condition it's in. This is a hardcover volume. I believe there was a softcover volume of this published. But the 2001 edition, that I never see that. I never see that. But this one I've seen quite a bit. And so I'm assuming that the contents are different in the two volumes. I'm assuming. This is probably the better one because all of his best stuff was done, I think, before the 1990s, for sure. He was always angry, Harlan Ellison, but he was probably angrier when he was younger. And the contents of this volume are really, really interesting. And certainly his best stuff is in this volume, but also stuff that isn't his best is in this volume. If you are intrigued by this author, and why wouldn't you be? Because he was such an interesting fellow, Harlan Ellison. This is the volume to get because this gives you a very well-rounded picture of this author and this author's concerns. I did a video recently where I was talking about separating the art from the artist. Harder to do with Ellison because he puts himself into all of his fiction so strongly. He is in every story that he wrote, good or bad. And no matter what you think of Harlan Ellison as a human being, I rather liked him from what I could see. But, I didn't know him personally. That's probably a good thing. But no matter what you think of Harlan Ellison personally, he is terribly interesting and important. Very important American author. I'm sort of surprised he's not already in the Library of America, but I kind of feel like that's inevitable. Like that has to happen at some point. But this volume, this is the one we're talking about today, and it has that really, really excellent cover. And who did that cover, does it say? Let's look. Let's look, because that's an excellent cover. Again, something I should have looked for ahead of time. I don't see it here. Somebody will tell me, because somebody out there in BookTube land knows. So check the content, the comments down below. Somebody knows who did that cover. It's not computer generated. It was from 1987. But let's look what's in this book. So this book is divided up into different sections with fiction starting from when he was very young, starting from when he was 15 years old with The Sword of Parmegon, written in 1949. So we have some of his early fiction from the 1950s for the most part. Then we have Worlds of Terror, Worlds of Love, that new old-time religion, which has I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And that is the story I hear about most nowadays. Has a Stab of Merriment. Man, all kinds of sections in here. A Trouble with Women. I won't list them all because there's a bunch. But let's take a look at some of the stories in here, because you certainly have some of his best stories. His award-winning stories are in this volume. But like I said, there's some stuff that are not award winners that are in here. Of course, we have I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. We've got The Whimper of Whipped Dogs is in here. We also have different items like Mom from 1976 that you might not find so easily in other places. Let's see. You've got The Tombs, an excerpt from his novel, his nonfiction work, Memos from Purgatory, which is about, the first section of that novel was about his time in a 1950s street gang, where he posed as a younger person to get in the street gang so he could write about it. I don't know how much truth is in that volume. Perhaps it's all true, except for one little bit that he admits to being false. But there's a section called The Tombs from that, which, if I remember, is from when he was thrown in jail. One of those times. What else do we have in here? We've got the Prowler in the City at the Edge of the World from 1967. Knox from 1974. So many stories are in here. Soldier from 1957 is in here. Shattered Like a Glass Goblin from 68. And Jefty is 5 from 1977. Jefty is 5 is one of my favorite Harlan Ellison stories, about a young boy who can never grow up. And that story is really, really good. Of course, Repent Harlequin, Said the TikTok Man from 1965 is in here. You're going to expect that, as well as The Deathbird from 1973. But this also has one of his greatest stories, A Boy and His Dog from 1969. And I mean, that is one of the greatest post-apocalyptic stories of all time. It's just a magnificent story. Very dark, of course, as you would expect. But I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that is in his greatest hits collection, the new collection. I don't think A Boy and His Dog is in there, which is lunacy, because A Boy and His Dog is fantastic. It's certainly one of his best. So yeah, this makes it better. This better already. And yeah, it just, The Man Who Is Heavily Into Revenge from 1978. I mean, it's got a ton of stories in here, and as you can see, and it does have an afterword from Harlan Ellison himself on page 1015. This is huge. This is a huge book, and so good. It is so good. It is such a satisfying reading experience. Since the publication of that new book, Greatest Hits, I've heard a little bit more about Harlan Ellison on BookTube, but I've never heard enough about this guy. This guy is an important writer. And my stepfather loved Harlan Ellison, and he had all of his books. in paperback, all of his paperback books, which he picked up as they came out. And so when I was a young man, a teenager, I read a lot of Harlan Ellison. And he was probably one of those writers who was important in how I think about things. He had such an angry, sharp intelligence. I wonder what he would have thought if younger Harlan Ellison could travel into the future, could travel to now and see the world as it is. I think he would be disappointed and horrified, but not at all surprised. He wrote different kinds of things. He wrote science fiction. He also wrote fantasy. He wrote horror, speculative fiction. He didn't have a lot of limits on the type of things that he would write. Fascinating writer. And if you were to read one thing, admittedly a giant thing, but if you want to read one thing, have one book that gave you a good picture of who this writer was, what his concerns were, what he wrote about, this would be the book to do it. So highly recommended if you could find it. The Essential Ellison 35-year retrospective. It's magnificent. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.